thanks guys for coming, showing up. We're going to be doing our post-series podcast again. So we did this a little while ago for the Revelation series, but we just kind of hung out and talked about really the biggest thing is what are those little nuggets that we wanted to bring into the sermons and into the series that we didn't really have an opportunity because we only have a limited time in those messages. So I'm really just excited to hear what are the things in this series that we just finished on Good God that you guys have to say that you wanted to say that didn't have time to say. What are the things that didn't fit? Yeah, right. There's a lot to say about a good God. He's pretty good. And I know we spent a lot of time reading that book, Gentle and Lowly, which personally was hard to get through, but full of beautiful. It was. I don't think I've ever read a book like that, right? Where it's like thick and dense, and you have to reread it again because sometimes the page is so boring you can't read it, but then sometimes you're like, I need to reread that again because that was like golden, and I need to read that like 10 times to really get it. It's just it's such a unique author.
It's not flashy. It's not flashy.
No, but I found it like, so I went through it. This is my I think my third time through it. So I found it. I read it like a devotional. So I read it kind of every day. And I just found it refocusing and life-giving. But I can see how, but it's, highly reformed.
And that's
a lot of Puritans.
That's what I ended up doing. I started off trying to just breeze through it because I was like, whoa, this is studying for the sermon series, but then it was like, no, I got a chapter of this a day.
You got to slow down.
That's all I can do. But it was beautiful. It was really had some profound points in there that we kind of structured things off of, right? This really was, Jeff was the one who spearheaded this series, I would say.
And I was going to say the reference books that he talks. I read the John Bunyan book. I'm like, if that was hard, John Bunyan's was even harder because it was like old English version of that book. But it's like if you slowly read it, you gain something out of it. And that's what I love about it.
But I feel like, I feel like we need to recapture some of that. I remember walking through Chicago and thinking like, how long did it take to build these buildings? And then thinking about how churches were built. Like in some ways, as you approach even the scriptures or an idea of gentle and lowly or a good God, like we have this like, how do we speed this up? How do we get this going? And I actually think like slowing down. So I started realizing like building campaigns were like, this is going to take 200 years or 150 years, but it's going to be beautiful. And it's, it's a long drawn out process. And I think sometimes as it relates to our spirituality, our relationship with the Lord, like how do we work through this? So I think a book like that kind of goes, and it slows you way, way down, and it makes you kind of get really focused on those certain aspects and attributes of God. And so that's what I really enjoyed about it. And I'm learning like, man, I got to figure out pace in my life. So that's been a big word for me, big thought for me is like, I need to figure out pace, but I need to figure out, I think I've cruised through these attributes of God so fast in my life because they've just kind of been normal. And I think in this season of my, I'm like, oh dude, I got to slow down on some of these and I got to like reflect on it. So that's, I think, why the book was helpful for me because I'm like, I need to slow down. I'm like cruising through and I'm missing so much. And so I felt like even in the series, I think the book just was like, let's slow down a little bit. Let's sit in this a second because we just make these assumptions. Well, God's good, right? God's good. God's good. That's why we're here at church, right? And we're starting to realize like, well, if I believe that, one, it brings a lot of questions to my heart. It really does. A lot of tension it brings to my heart. But it also is like, man, I think I'm missing out on the real goodness of it. I'm really feeling it and trying to apply it into my daily life. So anyway, that's a part of, I think, why that resource is helpful. And then some of the other ones he's referring to, it's like, you guys slow way down.
Well, and I think back on when I first became a Christian in high school, I remember I was listening to this guy that was preaching, and he said a very small percentage of Christians have actually read the whole Bible. So I thought, I'm going to change that, So I sat down and I was really just going, I'm going to try to read the Bible as fast as I can. And I'm just like pounding through it, And I did. I read the whole Bible as fast as I could, and I finished it and I thought, I don't know what I gained from that other than I can check the box of I read it really quickly. And I think that this book really points out that nature of slowing down and letting some of these things as you ruminate on them kind of hit your heart in a different way.
Yeah, Peterson has this idea of a slow down spirituality. So we just need to, if where church history has been is like in this last 30 or 40 50 years is like go build get big.
Right.
You know, it seems like something's happening in this season of church history. It's like, whoa, I think we missed a whole bunch. I think we've been cruising too fast, building too much, that interior life is struggling. So I think that's what really came out of the series that we walked through, is like, can we just slow down for a second, talk about some stuff, because it impacts everything. So
something really interesting happened in this series where it was, in some ways, it was your translation and your manifestation, Jeff, of something that really David was smelling early in the year, and probably beginning in last year. David smells, but something that he was really sensing of, like, wanting to lead us as a church into a season of trying to get strong, trying to root ourselves in the Lord. David, I wonder if you could kind of talk about, like, the thing that sparked this particular version of that, really, which is what's happening for the whole year.
When you guys are talking about the book Gentle and Lowly and the slowing down, and even just kind of the way the Puritan, and that was the thing, he was introducing a way that Puritans did theology, which is different than other people. But the word mercy was just, like, mercy is not quick, mercy is slow, mercy is instead of being powerful and like, quick and strong and on top, mercy is gentle and it's lowly. And you can't be gentle quickly, right? Like, when you're being gentle, you are slowing down because there's a sensitivity. And lowly is something that is just goes unnoticed. It's underneath, and so that's where I felt like and Jeff, you've, I feel like, been trying to cultivate that heart for mercy, and I think those two just go together so well. And so good God, looking at the goodness of God. Yes, he's almighty. Yes, he's powerful. Yes, he's done amazing things, but he's also gentle and lowly in Christ, and he wasn't too fast for anyone. And he wasn't in a hurry, even though it's a big job, right? And he didn't even start till he was 30 years old. It's so fascinating to me. And then, spent 3 years, super small town, only went to Jerusalem a few times. And yet he was supposed to save the world, And so that whole concept, it seemed like a very, and I think for, what's the guy's name?
Krieger.
Dane Ortland. Dane Ortland or something.
We're going to get it between all of us.
So I think for him, he was seeing in the Puritan, tradition, that type of pace and that type, where when you think, I mean, again, I don't know a lot about Puritan history, but you think of even like Amish societies or whatever, they're just kind of this separate, slow, not trying to keep up with technology, not trying to keep up with civilization or modernization. And again, right or wrong, I'm not saying one or the other, but it's just a different way of going about it. And when you look at the life of Jesus, you can see that there was some of that, that he really was in a hurry. I love the phrase in Isaiah where it says about the Messiah, a smoldering wick he would not put out, and a bruised reed he would not break, which is just so gentle and so lowly. And but anyways, so the goodness of God kind of tied in with that particular aspect of the goodness. All those other attributes of God are good,
sure,
but that one, and it's revealed in the name of God in Exodus 34 that He's abounding in mercy and compassion. But as far as what you're talking about, strengthening ourselves in the Lord, that's our banner for the year. And we're actually starting a sermon series this Sunday called Strengthening Yourself in the Lord. But I think looking at the goodness of God and finding His mercy is where we're going to find strength.
Well, part of that tension that we were working through was having to define strength. We've used terms like buoyancy, those are some of the, but we're like, well, we have to redefine strength, contextually, culturally right now. And so even as we kind of were going around horn trying to figure that out, it's like, well, let's look to God and let's deal with gentle and lowly, and that's power, that's strength, that's majesty.
Strength is we think strength is you never get tired. Strength is you never feel tired. You never meet something you can't do. But biblically, in the life of Christ, that's not the way strength is defined.
And it's what we gravitate toward, right? I mean, a lot of times that's what we're looking for in a leader, that they never fail, that they're always going, And I think for Jesus to display something so radically different, this sort of this laying your life down for people, the chief servant of all, it just flies in the face of everything our culture says should be strong leadership. And it's beautiful, and I think it's one of those things that challenges us too in the season where maybe everyone's confused. We're coming out of 2020, everyone's looking for like, let's have some clarity where we're going to go. And then you meet this God who meets you where you're at, you know, that walks with you in a gentle, lowly way, that doesn't add more burden onto you like everybody else is, who isn't there going, you got to do more, you got to dig deeper. It's not the God that we find in the Bible. And it's a beautiful thing, and it should be really freeing for us to go, Jesus is meeting us where we're at, and he's walking with us in that gentle and lowly way. It's beautiful.
One of the things that I was picking up on, you know, and even in that context of what you're talking about, strength and defining strength and what does that actually mean, you know, one of the things I've noticed lately and been spending a lot of time thinking about is that in American culture, we have a high value for what we call independence. And I wonder at that. I wish there were like a sociological history way to like go back and figure out how we came to that. Because I suspect it's because we've conflated, you know, independence from oppression with what we call independence on a personal level. I suspect it's because we said, well, no taxation without representation. Therefore, I need to be able to stand on my own 2 feet, and you know, I don't need a girlfriend. I don't need a boyfriend. I don't need a wife. I don't need a husband. I don't need, you know, my parents to help out with anything. I don't need friends. I can plow through and be strong and independent on my own.
I don't need to cut my hair.
Right. But you know, it's like, it's just so interesting that that's happened, and I don't know how that came about. That's my suspicion. Maybe there's a connection there with, which is funny because those are such wildly different things, right? Independence from oppression and independence from community and people and relationship and needing to stand on your own is very, very silly. But it's interesting, you know, the message that I was preaching on was Jesus as our advocate. And it's funny because, you know, an advocate is one of those things that happens much more in collectivist cultures and much less in individualist cultures like ours. And yet, it's not the kind of thing that you can avoid, right? We still have a word for advocate in American English. You know, we still know what it means. We've still witnessed people advocating for others. We've still, you know, witnessed those moments. But really, it's maybe a little uncomfortable for us. We're comfortable saying, I am an advocate. It's hard for us to say, I need an advocate. Because it feels like we failed an American value of independence to say, I need you to show up for me. I need you to, you know, it's like, to me, as you know, it reminds me of like, oh, being a little kid and like, I'm too scared to go order, you know, McDonald's, and my parents go and order for me, you know. And I remember actually vividly the moment when I was probably 7 or 8 and they said, here's, you know, $5, go to McDonald's and order for yourself. And I was like, I need an advocate, you know, someone help, someone go for me. But it's so interesting that I think in God's view of humanity, of what's healthy, there is something beautiful about depending on each other, about needing each other. And that in God's view of strength, there's something beautiful, there's something strong about saying, I can't. I need you. Like, Jeff, will you take the honor and the strength and the influence that you have, and will you go to this place for me and advocate for me? Will you show up on my behalf? Because I can't. I don't have it on my own. And that's a really beautiful thing.
That honestly was probably one of the, I think, harder realities for me as I was kind of working through the book, but then, you know, just personally, like I followed Jesus my whole life, and I really believe I had more of an agnostic, you know, theology without knowing it. Like, he did his work, he's all done, and now I got to do my work. I need to be a good soldier. I need to, you know, suck it up, buttercup spirituality, and get going. And so, like, I'm working through this idea of him being my advocate. I'm going like, why am I should be weeping. Like, I should be overwhelmed by the fact that Jesus's work didn't end with death, resurrection, and ascension. Like, he's still doing a work. And why can't I connect with that? Why can't I not be like, why is that not impactful? Well, because I'm independent. Because I'm going like, I got this, God. Like, I got this figured out. Like, you did your deal. You did your work. Now it's time for me to do my work. So, God, I'm not sure if I need you to intervene in my life too much. I'm just going to get going. And I was like, whoa. I mean, it was like, it took my breath away that I had gotten to a point where I had followed Jesus long enough where I was like, I can't connect with the fact that he's advocating to me, for me, to God. Like, he's still doing the work that he began. And I'm like, oh man. So I just went through like massive amounts of repenting through that and going like, I want to reconnect with this. Like, I need help. I need you. I need you to do, and I want to be grateful for that, you know? Yep. And so I think I probably struggle with that reality. I've struggled with grace, I think, because grace goes, you can't earn it, you know? Like, so I'm like, wow, I really need to dig into this. So again, so much of this is like, when you start realizing the goodness of God is not just this meta reality. It's just this very micro reality that it can bring unbelievable amounts of clarification to, why am I so tired? You know, this is that passage. Why am I so worn out? You know, this is what you were drawing out. Like,
I thought that was so funny in that idea of, well, so the gentle and lowly is the second half of the thought that Jesus is bringing forth, that if you come to me who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest. Just that idea that Jesus had been with humans as a human for 33 years at that point. You know, he had walked with them. You know, he'd been with the disciples specifically for that much time that he was talking to. Just his conclusion was, if you come to me, I'm going to give you guys rest. And I almost feel like either he was probably making fun of them a little bit in that. He's like, you people are crazy. You people are so strung out and worn out. People are so weighed down. If you come to me, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get nothing but just a nap. Because you guys are so, and I mean, I told the joke, like when I was in New York City, and I was just walking around and all these people just up all night. It's true. City never sleeps. But they look like they've never slept. They look exhausted and worn out. And I was just like,
I noticed the same thing about New Yorkers. You're like, go to sleep.
And so that's probably why you're so angry.
Yes.
And so Jesus, that's what he was saying. And obviously the you know, not funny reality is that the burden that people are carrying, there is a heavy load to our humanity, just dealing with our sinful nature, dealing with the sinful nature of those around us, and then the true, you know, graphic statistical realities of how much pain people really are enduring is intense. So I mean, so it's a real nice thing that Jesus is giving. He's not just making fun of us, he's actually trying to help too.
And I love on the backside of your sermon, I felt like the Lord was really speaking about the weight that other gods put on, lowercase g gods put on our shoulders, you know, whether it's sin, whether it's other religions, whatever it is, you start looking at it and it all adds up to more burden, more expectation, more earning. And Jesus is this beautiful, refreshing, sort of singular voice in the voice of all this like myriad of different voices that are trying to add burden onto us. And Jesus is going, I'm looking to take burden off of you. And what good news is that, you know? And I remember after your sermon, I just felt like this burden had lifted off of my shoulders even. And I've read that verse many, many times, you know. But to just come back to that and go, whatever the world's trying to put on us, whatever the world's trying to put on me, I started becoming keenly aware of it. And I'm going, it's weighty, it's really heavy, and it's more than I can stand. But Jesus is there looking to take weight off of my shoulders. How beautiful and refreshing is that, you know?
And I think sometimes, you know, in the idea of the yokeness, you know, one of the things I would have loved to have taken more time is in one of the commentary, I think I briefly talked about it. I would have loved to have way more conversation around this, but like they had said one of the myths that's out there is like that Jesus was the best because he was a carpenter and that his father was a yoke maker. But Jesus had, you know, the myth is he was the best yoke maker in the area. Like people came to him because he made the best yokes. And so, but I love that idea. One, it made it a little more practical for me. Like, oh yeah, that's right. More human. He's a carpenter. He's speaking to things that are just natural. But then the idea of him not just going, let me take that burden off of you, but him saying, let me link myself with you. Like that to me was like, again, that comes into conflict with that agnostic kind of way in which we kind of practically live out our lives and going like, he's just like, no, come on. Like, and he's just like leaning in and like, let's like that idea for me is like, okay, well, how do I practically apply that every day? Like in every situation, like most often I'm like, get out of my yoke,
Yeah.
I got this. And he's like, no, it's just way too heavy for you.
Yeah.
Let me come with, I'm with you here in this. I'm strapped into this apparatus with you, into this situation with you. And that for me was like, oh man, no wonder it's been so hard for so long. No wonder I'm so burnt out. Yeah. No wonder I'm so burdensome. He's
because with that too, it's not just weight, it's pace.
Yeah,
like that's the thing with the yoke too, is it's like
that's true.
You can't get ahead of the one next to you.
That's good.
So it's like a lot of times I think maybe it's not even weight but pace. We're trying to go faster and our feet are like dragging in the mud and we're like, come on God, we got to get going faster. And he's like, no, just slow down, I love, the
so
layers with that, with the yoke is beautiful.
It's one of the things that I try to remember. In fact, this morning in my quiet time, I was trying to just remind myself of this, is that, if our purpose for being, if the chief end of man is to know God and glorify him forever, if the function of our existence is just relationship with God, it's so ironic when we get caught up in the doing and the busy and get the anxiety. I was thinking that today. I was thinking of all the things that I have to do over the next couple of weeks and a number of things that feel really important and I can't drop the ball on and I got to do it. And I was thinking, okay, well, how many nights this next couple of weeks I'm going to be up late, making sure that I get everything done. And in my quiet time, I was just remembering, life is in a lot of ways just like going on a date with the Lord. It's like if you remember the dating days, and you go, or the days when you didn't know who you were dating necessarily as well as you do now that you have a wife, and you go on a date with someone, and it's like if you see an amazing movie, best movie you've ever seen, had the best food you ever had, and it's with someone that you don't like, that bugs you, that annoys you, that you're like, this is, it's not a good date, and conversely, and you're married, you have a wife that you love and your relationship is healthy, and you go and you see the worst movie you've ever had, and you try a new restaurant and it's horrible and neither of you like anything you get, and you're there in the company of your wife who you love. It's like, this is a great date. I enjoyed that. We got to go hang out and spend time together, and we do that like in life where we forget that we're on a date with God, with a good God. And so if I'm failing and dropping the ball, or there's too much to do, or it's just a bad movie, so to speak, but I'm in the presence of a good God, it's a great day. And if I'm, so focused on the stuff that I forget that I'm with someone really good to be with, then I miss out.
That part of your story I can connect with. I'm trying to go like dating God. I think the part that I think I resonate is the with part. Like you're with him and everything, so don't miss. My wife's always going like, we don't have to leave the restaurant yet. I'm like, I ate though. My food's
done eating. Check.
And she's like, we can just sit here and just talk. And I'm like, yeah, but we're all done here. We accomplished this task. And what she's really saying is, just be here with me. And I think I love that part of the illustration of going like, just be here with me. Like, let's do this together. Let's be here.
I was so excited about the next thing. Brittany and I went on a date Tuesday night. We went to the Suns game. Somebody gave us tickets.
What?
And so we're down there, and like, I remember when we first were dating, like I was prepared. Like I had the plan and all these things. And so we're driving there, and I'm like, oh shoot, I thought I had cash, for parking, and I didn't. So then we had to go to the ATM. We go to the ATM at this Circle K, and I needed gas anyway. So I'm like, okay, this is working out. And then I go in and I come back out. We get in the car. And I just drive off. And this has never happened to me before, but I heard this cling.
Oh no.
And I was like, oh my goodness. And I look back, and sure enough, I had driven off. And it's funny, in my mind, in the store, I was like, oh, she's probably gonna finish up because we're a team, and she normally does this stuff, but she was actually, something was going on at home with our kids, so she was wearing so I drove off and cling, and I'm so thankful that Circle K has these like compression fittings to where it was absolutely no problem at all. Everybody's nodding your head like you've done that before.
I have.
It was my first time.
I did it once.
It was my first time, and I was just like, what am I doing? And then it was so funny because then I just like laid the thing down, and the guy looked out at me, and I was like this, and he was like, yeah, because he had all these people, and I was like, just that, and he's like, yeah. And so then I just drove out, and then like I hit a curb when I was driving out, and I was just like,
it's all going down.
This is like the worst day. Like I'm totally messing up, and my wife's just laughing at me because obviously we're already together.
Yes.
But if it was the first date, she never would have dated me.
No.
But and I wasn't necessarily in a hurry, but I was just spacing.
Yes.
I was
Yeah.
like, I had this idea of getting to the game. I wasn't really kind of taking the steps or whatever. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was
No, but
fun.
the
That's so
presence
funny.
part, the part
Yeah.
you missed that.
And just
the-
in a hurry,
in a
and
hurry,
things
the
going
present,
wrong, and you're failing all the time, and yet the Lord's just there
Yeah.
smiling and saying, "Hey, it's
Yeah.
all right, man."
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Ryan, what were some of the? Did we get some of the nuggets that you were hoping to get out, but hadn't?
Well,
quite
it's
get
funny
some
because
fun
it brings
ones?
up you mentioned advocate, and it's so
Yeah.
funny. A little behind the scenes in our conversation was we talked a lot about intercessor versus advocate and what's the difference,
yeah.
because it's a very subtle difference. And even the week after I preached the message, David and I were still having conversation like, what is that difference?
Yeah.
And in my sermon, I was really careful. This is just a little bit of maybe inside baseball, but I was really careful not to say the word advocate.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to say he's interceding, he's in between,
He's
God and man,
yeah.
he's advocate. Like it's so easy to make that jump, you
yeah.
know? But to be able to take a step back, and we could talk about it a little bit. I love what you said in terms of the difference between advocate and intercessor. And then David brought out Mark Buckley, of course, had a really great insight into that. But for me, it was really a brand new idea when I read that book, that Jesus is praying for his people, that he's interceding for his people. Because we tend to think of, okay, the atonement on the cross. We just celebrated that with Easter. We get that. Theologically, it like seals itself up. It buttons up. Great, awesome. We understand that he saved us. We understand that he's coming back. He's very clear on that. Things are going to be set right. Our theme for Easter was God was, it was finished on the cross, but he's not done yet. So we know that there's still this completion that he has to pull everything together. But for me, it's that moment of stepping back and going, but what is Jesus doing right now? What's he doing right now? Is he just sitting at the right hand of the Father, just twiddling his thumbs, waiting to come back? And that verse in Hebrews 7, that he always lives to intercede for his people, was this kind of brand new idea for me.
Crazy.
And I, Gentle and Lowly really pulled that out. And there was that quote, and I can't remember what theologian it is. It's in my notes, but basically it said, if you knew all the things that you're going through in your life, if you knew that Jesus was praying for you, if you could hear him praying for you in the other room, what would that do for you? And he said something like, there's no mountain I couldn't climb.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing I could, like I'd be fearless if I knew that Jesus was praying for me in the other room. And for me, it just highlighted how much I always feel like my prayer life is falling short, how I feel like I need to be praying more, or I need better insight into what to pray for. And there's people in my life that have really taught me a lot about prayer and intercession, and it's beautiful and wonderful. But this gracious, again, the goodness of God to wash over you and go, when you don't know what to pray, that's okay. Jesus is praying for you. He's interceding for you. And I think that was just a fun thing. Fun is maybe not the word. It was a really liberating thing, I think, for me to unpack and know that even when I fall short in prayer, that Jesus is praying for us. But I think some of the things I didn't get to is Romans. Paul talks about the Spirit intercedes for us. There's with groanings, there's that verse. I think it's Romans 5 or 8, somewhere in there. And I started thinking, okay, the Holy Spirit is also interceding for us. And those moments where, for prayer in my life, there's been those moments where I really don't have anything in terms of words to bring, but just groaning before the Lord. And I don't know if you guys have been in that place, but you're like, I have nothing to say here. I'm not trying to come up with some eloquent word or some Holy Spirit insight to like blast the enemy. I don't know what to do but to just groan before the Lord. And this idea of intercession, this idea of prayer, I felt like I wanted to unpack even more, because it begs the question, if Jesus is interceding for us, what is prayer? Is it just bringing all right, Lord, I got 5 things I really need you to do for me today? No, it's something so much deeper than that. And I got an email from Daniel Riccio, who is just an integral part of our church. Mm-hmm. And we always send sermon notes to him whenever we're doing things, because he's got a photographic memory. He's unbelievable. And I always know if I send Daniel something, he's going to send me some nugget back that's amazing. And
or like a whole
giant nugget, yes. Yeah, really talk about having this like slowly
why didn't I have this
read
before I started?
And he's just amazing. And he sent me back this thing, and it was pretty mind blowing. But in Isaiah 56, when God's talking about my house will be a house of prayer. Before that, he mentions, I'm just going to actually read it because I've got it queued up here. He says, I will bring these to my holy mountain. I will make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples or all nations. And Daniel said that first part that he's referencing, my house will be a house of prayer. He said this is straight from Daniel. This is not me. He said in the original language, it's the pronomial suffix first common singular.
Yeah.
Yes, which we all knew.
I mean, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously.
But basically what he says is that God says this will be a house of my prayer. It's a possessive, it's him that's praying, which is a weird thing, right? It's like we've got a singular God. This is like singular God saying, I'm going to be praying in this house. Well, who is he praying to? And Daniel and I started going back and forth on text. And basically, to me, it's like this real beautiful reference to the Trinity. It's this idea of communal connection with God. And so when you start to think about just this big idea of what is prayer, really deep down, it's this communal connection with God that we get to walk in, and that the Trinity is displaying for us, even back in Isaiah, that there is this communal aspect to God. And I wanted to, I'm already going off on a tangent that I'm like, I don't know if I can bounce my way back into it. But that was something that, as I was reading, is like, okay, this is not just this one verse in Hebrews. There is precedent throughout the Bible of prayer happening inside of the Trinity, whether it's the Holy Spirit interceding on our behalf, whether it's Jesus interceding on our behalf, or this reference back to Isaiah. So that's a little nugget that, again, maybe just is more of a personal revelation for me of going, wow, I never thought of that. And that it has reference back to Isaiah was really pretty mind-blowing for me. So, yeah,
and that kick to go, that's why the Old Testament is important. Like there's, there's been over the last, 5 or 10 years where people are like, I don't think we need the Old Testament. Like, what?
Yes.
What are you talking about? So I think those passages too are like, no, it's so important. Like this has been modeled not just in the New Testament with Jesus, but like all throughout the Old. That's why you brought in, you were like, dude, let's start in the Old Testament first before we get into the New Testament. And I love that you started there. And I thought, so why did you decide to start there? That's a great question, because that wasn't in the book.
It wasn't in the book.
Well, good. I mean, it actually was.
It was,
but yeah, I didn't know that till later.
Yeah.
But good. Well, I mean, when I think of good God, obviously, I mean, the paramount portion of Scripture, for sure, the life of Christ, but then specifically with those words is Exodus 34, where Moses says, God, can I see you? Can I see your glory? And God said, yes, I'll let my goodness pass before you. So like the glory of God is his goodness. And so that's where I wanted to go. And that's Exodus 33. And that's just such fun passages there where the name of God is being more fully revealed. The substance of God is being revealed. Moses and God are getting closer, and so that was fun to start off that way, and then to tie that about the times in my family's life, in particular when we've gone on mission, and seen the goodness of God show up in those areas. And then, but then the next, so it was funny because then I was like, what am I going to do next? And then I was like, well, Exodus 34 is where the name of God actually is put on display, where he defines it, not I am that I am, but now, there's meat to that. And so the big part there was the mercy and the compassion and the love and the faithfulness, but he also, is punishing the wicked. And so just wanted to jump right into that to kind of set a tone for now. Now we get to see Jesus, who is the living human form, description, example, or as Hebrews says, he's the exact representation of the Father, in bodily form. And so then, intercession and all this. And I so appreciated the way you kind of frame that is like, okay, we know what Jesus has done. We talk about it a lot. We know what Jesus is going to do. We dream about it a lot in some ways. But what is he doing right now? That was just a really helpful way to then dive into these specific things, which are there in the New Testament, but they don't get a lot of airtime. And I think that's what the Dane Ortland guy was trying to say is like, hey, there's some depth to some of these little things that we say, oh yeah, he intercedes for us, and then we move right on. But he's like, hold on, let's dive into this and see what that really means. But that's why, I think the Old Testament gives us a picture oftentimes of New Testament principles.
Yeah.
And so to just realize that this is God from the beginning. This isn't, some new phase or new evolved or modern version of who God is. No, this has always been the way he is. And this is just, Christ was that full revelation. An interesting time.
I heard a comedian say that the Old Testament is the bad Bible and the New Testament is the good Bible, but then, when you bring that Exodus 33 passage out, you're like, no, this is who I am.
Yes.
You're like, whoa, because I think people go, why do we have the Old Testament? All this, God's like after, it seems like he's after, and then you start reframing all that in the goodness and the mercy, and you go, maybe I need to rethink all that, and then Jesus is the fulfillment, the flesh of that. And that goes, wow, now this is how it all works together. So I think like if you're somebody who's kind of sitting in a pew week in and week out, and you just come and hear sermons that are just kind of yanked out of scripture, sometimes you miss that full reality. And that's like, hopefully it's like, dig into that, it's the same story, it's the same story, dig into that.
And that revelatory moment of, Lord, show me your glory. I love when you talk about burning bush God, and and you did such a good job of pulling out the vulnerability of Moses, because he's got to be feeling like, just because you hear a voice out of a burning bush isn't like now I know God's with me and I can do anything. It's probably a very weird thing for him, and he's going up against all the things I grew up learning about. This seems so small, and he's going, show me your glory. And for us, it's glorious power and strength and might, and I'm going to destroy my enemies. And God does talk about those things, but that kind of bait and switch moment where he goes, I'll show you my glory. I'll let my goodness pass before you. I thought that was so beautiful.
It's like, wow, so powerful.
Your goodness. Your glory.
It could have been
what?
Anything.
Yes.
And that's your goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
I think it's so heartbreaking that people have that perspective on the Old Testament. And it's always funny for me to even hear that, right? Because David was my youth pastor from 7th grade, more or less, on. And he loves the Old Testament, So I'm like, there are people who don't love the Old Testament. I don't know what they're missing.
It was Jesus' Bible.
Yeah, it's pretty good stuff.
I mean, just fun fact.
Fun fact.
That was the Bible that Jesus read.
It's pretty valuable, and it's full of beautiful things. But I remember having this moment a couple of years ago. I was my wife and I, we were in Southeast Asia doing some anti-trafficking ministry, and one of the things that we were doing during that year was I got to teach English class to the women in the safe house who had come out of trafficking, and it turned out to be one of the most valuable things that I've ever done. I could see what the Lord was doing in these women in that space, but also just what I learned from that. And so it was me and another Western young woman, and then these two women who, that woman was on staff, and these two women who were in the safe house. And in English, we decided we would go through the book of Genesis in the Message translation, just try to go through and kind of get 2 for 1, right? So we'd tell a story, and the message, and we'd pull out vocabulary they didn't know and play silly games with that vocabulary later on, and we'd kind of kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone. And so we're going through the book of Genesis, and what you don't realize when you read through the book of Genesis until you're reading through it with 2 women who've recently escaped, a lot of sexual abuse, is that the book of Genesis is profoundly scandalous. Like every freaking story, I mean, page 1, they're running around naked, and then there's some murder going on, and then it's like there's Noah, and he's passed out drunk, and I remember going through that story, and one of the women, picked up on something that a lot of people don't necessarily pick up on that. It may have been because we were reading the Message, and I think Eugene Peterson cues in on this, but that there was probably some sexual abuse that took place in the story of, with Ham and with Noah passed out. Yeah. And she just said that, did Ham do something to his dad? And I said, well, gosh, like you're the first person I've ever heard read this story but for her, it's obviously, of course it would. And you realize contextually when you pull it out of your Sunday school understanding of that story, and then you move on and it's like Abraham, and then Lot and his daughters, getting him, and I remember, I think it was when we were reading the story of Hagar, every time we would read one of those stories, I would throw all these qualifiers at it. And I would say,
let me soften this for you just a little bit.
Because I'm just terrified. These women have just recently come to the Lord, and I'm like, what's going to happen when they read how messed up these stories are, And it was at the time we got to Abraham and Hagar, one of those stories involving her, where she's, I'd say, arguably, assaulted. Certainly wasn't, at best you could call it a power dynamic imbalance, right? What's going on there. And then she's abandoned, and by Abraham, right? Like the patriarch, the father of Israel, right? The good guy in the story, And so I'm trying to explain, like, just because the people in the Bible do it doesn't mean the Bible's, saying that this is a good thing. It's not a story where we're meant to emulate everything they do. We're focusing on what God does here. And one of the women stops me in the middle of that, and she says, Alec, I don't think you understand what the story means to me. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, I think it's a really, really good story. She said, Abraham did this, right? And I said, yeah. And she said, and God used him, didn't he? And I said, yeah. And she said, so he'll use me.
Wow.
And I was like, yes was all I had to say to that. Because in my mind, I'm thinking she sees herself only in Hagar's shoes. In my mind, she's the woman who's been abused and trafficked and all this kind of stuff. And in her mind, she's Abraham and Hagar. Because I only see her through the lens of you've been wronged. But she knows that in those dark places that she has shame and guilt, that some of which is not deserved and some of which she knows, and she may be the only one who knows, is deserved. I would never say that to her. You know what I mean? I want to spend the rest of my relationship and friendship with her untying that shame and guilt. But like, she knows that she did wrong things. And she then went on to do a search through the whole Bible of all of the abused women and all the prostitutes in the Old Testament. And when she was telling me about that, I thought, this book was written for prostitutes. Like this book, it's over and over and over in the Bible. There are multiple prostitutes in the lineage of Jesus. And obviously I don't mean that necessarily literally, but I think the Bible was aiming low. And by aiming to the lowest.
Well, it's funny you say that, because that's the part that, I would have loved to spend a ton of time, but in Matthew 11, where he goes, thank you that you have not revealed this to the powerful, to the not, that you've revealed this to the childlike.
Which is right before the gentle and lowly.
And it was like, that was like, oh, this is the whole story, so it makes sense exactly what you're saying. This is all, why is it that people are missing it? Well, because you're not gentle and lowly yourself. You're not broken. You don't think you're independent. You're sufficient for yourself. I don't need God. I don't need Jesus's intervention. Well, no wonder we're all wound up. No wonder we're all tired. And so he's like, because you don't get it. You don't understand. But who gets it? Prostitute gets it, who's been rescued, and she feels the fullness and wholeness of that love and care and mercy. She gets it. The children get it. Those who are able to look at their sin. Lord Jesus, we need to be talking more about sin. Because if we can't talk about sin, Good Friday makes no sense. It just makes no sense at all. But when we kind of get to that place of going like, no, we gotta talk about this. We gotta deal with that stuff, because people who feel that have gone. I meet with people who are new in their faith, and you all do too. And I get this kickback all the time. Man, I wish I had been a Christian as long as you've been a Christian. And I'm like, no, no. And I don't feel bad for being, but there is a freshness and aliveness and energy. The worship is like, that song's, and they're, and the scriptures are coming alive, and it's like, there's a real dependency. Like, I need the Lord. I need him to speak to me. I need him to care for me. And I'm honestly so kind of holy jealousy, you know, about where you're at in your walk right now.
Yes.
And I'm like, how do I get back to that place? You
Yeah.
know, how do I resonate with a prostitute who goes like, whoa, do you see the goodness of God here?
And that's something that we were trying to be real
Yeah.
careful of from the very beginning.
Yes.
Is the phrase "good God." right?
Yes,
Yes.
100%.
Oh, God is good. You hear that all the time, and again, it's never not right.
No.
It's always the right thing to say, but sometimes it can feel so trite, and it can almost feel like gross.
Yeah.
To just be like, oh, but God is good, when it's like, yeah, but I feel like you're saying that to try and put a Band-Aid on my pain,
Yes.
and you're not acknowledging my pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so from the very beginning, I remember that was a big part of what we were trying to do, is say, hey, this is not us trying to pretend there is no
Bad
pain and evil and agony in our world. This is a deliberate choice by a community
Yeah.
to say, okay, we're going to acknowledge and realize there is all of this before our eyes all the time, especially as we're getting in. I mean, I think we started.
Well, that was your first one.
same,
Yes.
same
Yeah.
when Ukraine was invaded.
Yeah, your first one was right
Yeah.
after.
And so it was
yeah.
like, we're not. This is not a pretending or trying not to, engage in society's pain. That's a big part of what our community is about. But this is a deliberate choice for the next few, weeks or months, to turn our eyes towards the goodness of God. To
Yes.
look to the hills from where our help comes from, and just to saturate ourselves in the gospel and the good news and all of those things, so that we can strengthen ourselves for the day of opposition.
Yes.
And so that's a really important factor that you guys are both bringing out, is the goodness of God. It's something that is somehow intertwined with, the evil
Yes.
that is in our world.
Yeah.
And the promise is that it wins out, but the reality is we're still a work in progress.
It only has
Still
depth, I
working
think,
itself out.
when it's contrasted, And I think I think about that every Good Friday and Easter. It's like the thing that gives Easter so much power is the contrast of the darkness of Good Friday. And I think, not that I want to talk about this because I know we're about to dive into it so much, but we've been studying Job a lot. And one of the heresies that's in Job, because Job is one of those funny books where it's like you read through it and you go, I agree with all that stuff. Like if you highlight the stuff you agree with, you're like, I agree with all of this.
And it worked out.
And it worked. Hey! Yeah. But one of the heresies was not what Job's helpers, which they're not very helpful, or comforters. One of the things they don't acknowledge, and it's not what they say, but it's what they don't say. They don't acknowledge an enemy at all. They don't acknowledge Satan at all. They're just trying to put things together in terms of, if I do good, then good will happen to me because God is good, But it just reminds me of that passage in Luke 22. That was one of the main things for me on my message when I came back around on it. And there's a very Job moment that happens where Jesus turns to Peter and calls him Simon, which is his old name, which I think is,
awesome.
Again, I would have loved to have gone off on that tangent, but I won't. But he kind of refers to his old nature, and he says, Satan has come to me and asked me to sift you like wheat. And it's a very Job moment of Satan coming to Jesus going, hey, that guy, I want him. I want your boy. Yeah. And Jesus goes, but I've prayed for you that your faith won't fail. And I think where we get into that sort of like candy coated, yeah, God's good. It's all great, right? Just take this pill. It'll be awesome. We don't acknowledge that there's an enemy. We don't acknowledge that there's evil. And you talk so much about it for Easter. There's evil that we've done. There's evil that has been done against us. Both of them have things we need to work through. But we have to acknowledge that to understand the goodness of God with roots, not the surface level, God's good, everything's going to work out great. But truly understanding that in the midst of an enemy trying to come up against us, and in the midst of a world that's completely fallen, we serve a good God, though the world around us is not good, And we have to be able to put those together in a meaningful way, So.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I'm most resonating right now, even in my study and even in my thinking and praying and quiet, is like Jesus is not telling me to not be human.
Yes.
Like he's telling me to be present in my pain. Like Jesus was present in his pain. He's standing, I have this very vivid moment that I come to a lot. It's kind of, I would say, kind of a centering moment. And it's just hanging out with Jesus on top of that hill after Palm Sunday, looking over Jerusalem and just weeping. Because it brings so much conflict to me initially. Because I'm like, what are you crying up here for? You're gonna go die and resurrect. It's gonna be great, But he was feeling the full weight of humanity, feeling full weight of rejection, feeling full weight, all of it. And he's going, I am present in my humanity. I'm not trying to escape out of here, which is so culturally speaking right now. It's what everyone's trying to do.
Yes.
I ascend to whatever I feel, and that because I feel it makes it right.
Yes.
Buddhism sounds so good right now.
Doesn't it?
If you can just escape.
Yes.
Escape the division, escape the people around you, escape the pain within you, escape all of these. I mean that's the
100%.
promise of Buddhism is if you do enough meditation, if you do enough of these practices, you can escape reality. You can escape the pain, and that the way of Jesus is we're going straight into the pain, and we're going to insert the goodness of God there and see what wins.
Exactly.
Eventually, over time, in the
Because why would Jesus weep over Lazarus? He knew he's going to raise him from the dead. He's entering into the pain with everybody else. You know?
I was like,
And
I
it's
don't know what to
beautiful.
do with a God who cries.
Yeah.
Like
That
I don't.
Son of Suffering song on Good Friday.
Oh, man.
The God who weeps and the God who bleeds.
Yeah.
What kind of God is this?
I remember when I was a freshman in high school, I had an anthropology class, and we had a sub come in. We were doing a unit on world religions. And I remember the sub saying, Christianity is, he was saying something to the effect of, I don't like Christianity because it is in some ways the darkest religion, in some way, it's like, you worship someone who was, he's on a cross hanging up there dying, and there's
not a
so
fun
much,
story.
there's
Not
so much
sanitary.
pain
No.
involved. Yeah. And it's like, there's truth to that. And, but also like open your eyes and look at the world around you. Like the Christian worldview is the only religious or religious worldview or worldview that's religious that says it's not religious. It's the only worldview, period, that holds in tension the reality of humanity, the reality of that there is pain and suffering and wrong and evil, but there is joy and goodness, and the reality that we are stuck in the hole, but it also offers us a way out of the hole, and the reality that there is a beautiful and a perfect and a holy, and there is a knowable God. And we can engage in relationship. And it's the only worldview that offers all of that. Every worldview, if you dive into Buddhism, like you're saying, like, oh, this beautiful escape and serenity, that's wonderful. But what do you do when that's not possible? Or other or religions.
It's so self-serving. Like, what do you do when you found serenity, but what about all the people around you? Like you escaped them.
Yes.
I get how it sounds good. But first of all, it's not reality. And then the second thing is it's just so self-serving.
100%.
And when you don't confront sin, like you were saying, it's like this. It's a very shallow form of hope. And that's what's so hard. Like you look at culture right now, and they're going the opposite way, where they're like, everything is right and everything is good.
Whatever you feel,
it's all good. Everything's great.
Yeah.
But deep down, we know it's not true, and they can plumb the depths of everything that sin could quote give them. But it just creates more and more darkness. And Nathan on our staff, he said this a while ago. He said, but 2020, one of the good things was people were alone with themselves for a long time. And he said, a lot of the kind of church culture where we go, hey, you're awesome. God loves you. He's got the best for you. Like, he goes, people are coming back to church and they're hearing that message and they're like, I know I'm not good. Like, I just spent a year by myself.
Yeah.
I'm dark and I need help. Tell me what to do. Like, I need help. And without confronting, and even confronting isn't the word, diving into understanding of the depths and the darkness of sin that exists in all of us, and understanding that there is that darkness that happens, the goodness of God is just this shallow thing. If we go, hey, but all that stuff's like kind of okay too, you know, but then God's even better than that. There's no contrast, but deep down the human soul understands the darkness and depravity that's over here and the goodness and the light that's over here. And we have to be able to talk about them, because that goodness and light without the contrast of that is meaningless.
Yeah, and I think people are done with lollipop Christianity.
Yes.
You know, like this little girl that's got these little, you know, and she's got this big lollipop and she's going down the street with her balloon, and like everyone's done with that version, or that version of Christianity is kind of going away. And you've got a millennial culture, which I'm a big fan of, who's just going, time out. This is not real. This is not fit. This does not reflect.
It's not working.
It's not working, and it doesn't reflect the world we're living in, because they're kind of awakening us to going. I mean, I went through 9/11. You know, Berlin Wall. I remember that. I remember as a kid hiding under my desk because the Russians were gonna, you know, send over nuclear bombs to blow us up. Like I grew up in that world. Well, for them, this whole thing that we've been through is the most tragic thing that they've been through. And they're like, that God doesn't match. Because you've been telling me like everything's gonna be great, it's all gonna work out, you just have to follow Jesus, you know, and they're going like, this isn't real. This is what the gospel doesn't match, because we're going, what we're really saying is, I don't know what to do with the humanity of Jesus, the suffering of Jesus. I don't know what to do with that. We got to get past that story, get to resurrection. And I think that's what you're saying. Like, what we're really going like is, look how human Jesus was. Look how he suffered. Look that he came, God came to us. He didn't have to do that. I mean, he could have figured out a whole nother way to, and he was like, no, I want to be with you in this. I want to suffer with you in this. And why can he advocate for us? Because he's been there. Why does he intercess for us? Because he knows how much we need prayer. Right?
Absolutely.
You know, and how exhausted are you of people that come up to you and go, you know, and it's a Christian way to end a conversation. I'll pray for you. And I want to be like, bull. I don't think you are. I want to say it. I feel it. And to know like Jesus,
for sure.
Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus is true to his word, and he's going to be that for us. So he is that. Why? Because he came and he knows and he empathizes and his heart breaks. And what does he do? He just proactively continues to serve us in the heavenly realms. And then the Spirit of God is with us. So I sent you guys that quote, is like infinite incarnation. That for me was like life-giving this week, to the idea of like incarnation wasn't that just Jesus came, he walked among us, died, resurrected, is in heaven. That incarnation is still with us right now through the Spirit of God. I'm like, that means he's a good God. Like how good, how gracious, how kind. And I think maybe I have felt little pictures of this throughout my walk with the Lord, but I feel like I'm finally like coming to some sense of like that peace that comes from really believing that, like I'm not being inebriated by some lollipop Christianity. Like I feel it. I feel my depravity. I feel the sin, but I feel his mercy, and I'm like, man, I that's exciting for me. That feels like
you need both, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's the people that show up at church and they know the darkness that they're going through. They're already convinced that they're a dark, depraved person, and they're going, gosh, if I could just clean up a little bit, then I'll come to God. And we've all talked to people like that, like, yeah, you know, I'm just in a dark place right now, and I'll come back to God when I get out of it. And you're like, no, like, don't wallow in that. Don't stay there. Jesus is going to be with you in that and walk you out.
I always say it's not, Jesus is not saying get clean and come to me. He's saying come to me and I'll get you clean. You know, and I love that with this series that it kept going into, there felt like there could have been a natural break at Easter. But then upon further reflection, we said, well, it should really be included. Easter should be included in this series. And I loved even just where we landed and where you ended it up, right? Of this message of, you know, it is finished, but he's not yet. I'm wondering, David, if you could talk a little about that. I mean, because even it was a unique take, right? Because it wasn't the Easter, the obligatory Easter message. You know, you barely even touched that, but you went into the reality of this. Like, you know, now but not yet, like it's finished, but he's still working. That what is Jesus doing now kind of stuff. So I'm just wondering if there's more in that, or even just if there's not more nuggets out of that, but like what brought you to that place to say, let's do this thing that, you know, we're not supposed to do on Easter?
Well, I don't know why, but we planned Easter before we even got into the sermon series, at least some of our initial ideation, and the whole idea of theodicy was something that was just there, and it was like, okay. And I remember when
which theodicy, for anybody who's not tracking with big fancy word, right, is how is God good in the face of evil and tension and brokenness?
Yeah, and that was, we just kind of put it there on the table, and it was like, I don't know if we should even try to take this on, because it is just such a deep. I mean, for all of human history, there's this challenge between, can God be really good when there's so much evil in the world?
Yes,
and so that's this crash that to try and do that on an Easter Sunday feels foolish in some ways, because it's like, you really think you're going to clean that up in one little 20-minute talk or whatever? And yet, we felt like there was just kind of there. And then as we did Good God, and you introduce God in Exodus 34, you have full of compassion, forgiveness, love, all these things, yet punishes the wicked. And so you have this, even in that, you have a little bit of this reality of the nature of God, and the kind of razor blade edge between mercy and judgment that is fully there, but fully good on both sides. The substance of that mountain that peaks between those two is goodness. And the peak of that is the cross, where those two rivers, the mercy and justice of God, come crashing into one river that provides the healing for the nations. I mean, that's the theodicy. And yet, I remember saying the only answer I ever feel comfortable even like whispering into the area of theodicy is, well, the story's not over yet. So how can God be good when we see so much evil? Well, the story's not over yet. And so then that was a matter of, okay, bringing in the idea that Jesus is still working, and he's working on us. That was, Philippians 1. Paul says, I'm confident of this, that he who began a good work will complete it, to the extent where you'll say, that was good. That was really good. And you'll say it about your own existence, which is really incredible, because of the evil that's been done to you and the evil you've done. But we'll be able to say it about every single thing, like the angels say, righteous and true are every one of your judgments. Even though that they were saying that in the midst of the tribulation and Revelation, where all hell's literally breaking loose on earth. But so that was kind of, all those things just kept like pushing towards that moment. And then with the idea of it is finished, ... like it's finished, but the story isn't over yet. He dealt the blow to evil, but yet he still hasn't, basically done what he earned the right to do. And that's Acts chapter 3, where one day Jesus is going to return and he's going to restore everything. And those phrases of like what Tim Keller put together with Lord of the Rings, everything sad will come untrue, which is enough to kind of make you like, I want to believe that. I want to believe that. But then he adds, and somehow be better for having once been broken. And then it's just like, what kind of goodness are we dealing with? Like if that can really be true, then all of a sudden theodicy, it's not such a challenge. If that can be really true. And so, Easter Sunday, we started at the beginning and the tohu vabohu, and how God made good out of that. And then we went to Joseph, which Joseph's the perfect story, because it's got the beginning, it's got the challenge, it's got the ups and downs, and then it's got the actual dawning, where when that goodness, when there had been enough time on that particular thing, Joseph was able to weep out loud. And that's an interesting, he got to the top of the prison. He got to the top of being in Potiphar's house. He got all of these momentary goodness, but they didn't make him weep. It wasn't until he saw the full reality of how God was using the evil that his brothers did to actually save his brothers and his father's house and all the things he cares dearest about. And
by the way, to fast forward, it's like, but also save Israel.
So much more.
So much more.
And more than Joseph would even
That's what people don't realize. Sure. It wasn't just...
And that we'd be preaching Joseph's life on an Easter Sunday, thousands and thousands of years removed. So that the story, the goodness is just continues on. But that's where it all just kind of came together into this Easter moment, which again, then looking at Easter Sunday is the greatest evil that humanity had ever done, crucifying the anointed one, the Christoph. And yet God taking that and turning that into the salvation for everyone. Yeah. I mean, that's
the most
kind of goodness
unjustified death bringing justification. Yeah.
Well, Dalton and I were talking this week about how it's the archetype for every story. Mm-hmm. It's the archetype for
the hope of every heart.
It's the hope of every heart.
Every story, you start with that, and everybody's like, "Please, Lord."
Yep. It's the archetype of every story.
Yeah. That's how C.S. Lewis came to Jesus, right? Him and that conversation between him and Tolkien that we all wish we could have listened in on, right?
Yeah.
Them talking about, legend and myth and these themes that come, like, no matter where on the world you go, you find human beings and this story just comes out of them.
Yeah.
Right? And then supposedly there was a moment when Tolkien said something to the effect, to C.S. Lewis of like, what if just one time that wasn't just a myth and it really happened and it overlapped with reality? What if it actually came out in the human
Everything
story?
else is just an echo of
Yes.
an original.
Yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful reality of like, and again, it's, even, what is it, Ecclesiastes or Proverbs, where it says God has set eternity in the heart of man. Like, we just can't get away from it. No matter where we go, no matter how far into the bush, no matter what continent, you know what I mean? You get people together and they start talking and thinking, and Jesus is going to just come out eventually in some format that we're longing for him.
Yeah.
This quote didn't make it in to my Easter message, but I don't know. It doesn't solve a lot here. But Augustine, who was a early influential church thinker and writer, but he says God judged it better to bring good out of evil than to suffer no evil to exist. And again, it doesn't give us an answer like, Job, but it just is like, okay, so God thought it was better to bring good out of evil than to make sure there was no evil.
100%. That's mind.
So then we have to sit there and then determine, like every single thing, does God know what he's doing?
Exactly.
Like, do I have a better idea or does God have a better idea? And again, the promise of the scriptures, the good news of the gospel is that one day we're actually going to fully understand. Like it's going to be revealed how it was better.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily our story now. And that, for me, the message on Easter that was most for me, like, and I'm still kind of like chewing on, I guess, or getting nourished from, was just the idea that right now in my life, I feel like, I there's a lot of goodness, right? Like my family is just, everything's going well. The church things are going well. We're about to go on this mission to Ireland, and I feel so good about this. And, someone literally just texted me this morning and said they have a car for us that they want to give us in Ireland. Somebody I've never met. They're like, we heard there's a Christian family coming, and so we wanted to give you this car.
Wow.
It's amazing.
And it's just a mechanic guy, and it's it's not the nicest car you've ever seen, but it'll work, and it's actually big enough for my family, and a wheelchair. So it's like,
you just got to live in it now.
It's unbelievable. And we don't have a house, so that might be where we live. But anyways, like the goodness of God that just continues and continues and continues to show up. I don't even remember what I was saying. I was just thinking about this car and living in it.
Sorry, David.
No, I love it. But I think
the biggest challenge you're saying in this season coming out of Easter, that message for you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
You've
the
seen
thing
a lot
that
of
was most meaningful to me was that I can honestly say, and it's okay for me to say that I'm not Joseph in chapter 45 or chapter 50.
Yeah.
I'm Joseph maybe, at the top of the slave pool in Potiphar's house.
Yes.
Like I've seen enough goodness of the Lord to say, hey, I'm thankful and I'm grateful, and I have to watch my heart because I should be more grateful than I am. Or maybe I'm the top in the prison. Or maybe I'm even, second in command of all of Egypt. But none of those things were the moment where something happened in Joseph's soul.
Yes.
And I can honestly say, like with this, I talked about the suicide of my dad, and then I didn't bring this up because it's more my daughter's story to tell. But I have a daughter in a wheelchair, and so there's an evil that has taken place, part of this fallen reality that she now, isn't able to walk and has to deal with a million things. But it's like, I'm not at the place where I can say, like Joseph, I get it. I can see that the goodness is better than the evil. However, I'm holding on to that promise. And and the resurrection continues to point in that direction. And so I'm going to keep going towards that mountain. I'm going to keep climbing that mountain because I want to see from that view. But I'm not there yet. And that, I don't know, was just comforting for me.
Well, and I think that tension is so important. I think we're always trying to run away from tension. You know, and I think, you know, all throughout Jesus's life, there's so much tension there. You know, so much tension there. You know, and so I actually think that at least is on it. I had heard a guy say, he was preaching on the Psalms, and it was like, you ever had somebody preach a message and you were like, oh, why have I never heard that before? Like, why? And he was like, in order to be truly human, really truly human, embrace that. We need to learn to protest God, and we need to learn to praise God. Like, but if either one of those get out of balance, it's bad. But keeping those in tension is why David's a man after God's own heart. Is we have to learn to protest God, and God is not offended by our protests. He's not.
Because ironically, I think protesting God brings a vulnerability a little bit, you know. And I love what you brought was vulnerability. And the thing that always strikes me about the crucifixion is how vulnerable would you feel? Like, I just think physically. Like, very few of us have ever been tied up genuinely in a violent sort of manner. But how vulnerable would you feel having your arms nailed out like this, you know? And Jesus walking through this, and I think it's showing us what we need in our life. Like, you cannot go through life without sort of intense vulnerability at some point, you know, and whether it's sin, talking with, you know, your own personal sin or whatever it is, or just vulnerability and going, God, like you guys are doing, you're stepping out and you're going, I need you to come in and give us a place to stay. I don't have any options here. There's that vulnerability that Jesus displayed for us that I think we're all called to walk in. And I think that's what's so, when you're talking about the goodness of God or the darkness and all of those things, just bring out this real sense of like, I actually don't have as much power as I think. And there's that real moment where we have to just say vulnerably, Lord, I don't know what to do here, you know? And that's one of the things that I so appreciate about our church, and with even Mark Buckley giving us such a foundation of vulnerability and leadership, and leaders that spend their whole life avoiding vulnerability. It really shows, you know, at some point it cracks them down, and Mark never displayed that, and you've never displayed that, and having that sort of vulnerability is vital in understanding the goodness of God.
Yeah, and then there's that reality. I mean, as you were talking, I'm like, Jesus is on the cross knowing that God could just change all that.
Yes.
He could, like, so he resonates with the feeling of humanity that goes, why aren't you doing anything? Like, get me off this cross.
My God, why have you forsaken me?
Exactly. My God, why have you forsaken me? So he's up there going, you can do something. Like, and you can do something, you can get me off this cross, and everybody here can come and know that, you know, he could have done a miracle on that point, and everyone would be like, oh my gosh, like, but he didn't. And so even Jesus resonates with those feelings of going like, my God, why aren't you doing something? Why aren't you, you know, and I feel that. I feel that deeply. And so it's like, hey, that's a real thing. Like, if we just start making this about a story. I was working through on Monday how quickly we just move past Easter and get to Monday. And I was like, Monday for me felt kind of like, man, I don't know what to do with today, because I don't know if I want to run past. I feel like I'm run past it like it's just a date on a calendar, and I'm like, I don't feel like this is done impacting me, you know. And so even as we're talking, I'm like, like I resonate with that, and I'm sure a lot of people resonate with this feeling. Like, where are you? Why aren't you doing something? I know you can do something. I know you can rescue me out of this situation, and we believe in faith He can do that for people. But sometimes He doesn't. You know, and what do? We join Jesus in His proclamation of going, I don't get this, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that in some ways goes, that's human, that's broken, that's childlike, that's gentle, that's lowly. He's a good God, you know, like that. I find far more comfort in that than like some Jesus Christ superstar, you know, who just razzles and dazzles, you know.
It comes back to what He was praying for Peter, and what I think He's praying for us, that our faith won't fail. Because at some point it's like we're we're going to enter into plenty of places where our faith can fail. And you could look at the season right now, whether it's COVID or war or whatever, and our faith can fail daily. And Jesus is praying for us that our faith wouldn't fail in the face of injustice, in the face of darkness that doesn't make sense, in the face of the things that he lived and walked through and that we walk through every day.
And the Bible does not avoid the reality of the tension of the not yet that we live in. And I think there are so many areas, so many angles from which to approach kind of this conversation of theodicy and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that we did try to do, I think, in that series, Good God, right, was just to say, can we just look at the goodness a little bit? Can we just take a moment and in the midst of the pain and the chaos of in literally at the inception of a war that has shaken us, the world in a lot of ways, obviously people in Europe and Ukraine a lot more than you and I in some significant ways, but in the midst of all of that, can we just come to a place where we say, the working out of it is a little foggy for me, but I have these moments that I can look to just say, gosh, there is the goodness of God that I can cling to and say, in that moment, there wasn't a shadow of a doubt. I might not have been able to connect all the dots and do the math on it, but I could say, God is so good. I'm watching there. So I'm wondering if before we wrap up, we could just one or two of those stories of where's a moment where you just saw the goodness of God that we could all kind of look at with you.
It's funny. Went out to dinner with the Woosters on Tuesday, Taco Tuesday. So that was the first time we'd been out with them, and it was so good. But they were kind of telling hey, tell us your story. So Pat and I were walking, my wife and I were walking through our story, and I remember the story, but it came up when we were talking about it. I was like, whoa! But we were saying in almost every situation that we've had that's been difficult, and we've had quite a few, that God has kind of revealed His goodness and kind of prepared us for that. So one of the stories we were telling is a guy, so I was running PHX1 version 1. So this is maybe 11 years ago, okay? So, and a guy came into my office just randomly and handed me an envelope with $10,000 in it and said, "This is for you. God told me to give this to you." And I was like, "Oh, cool. It's a donation to the ministry. Thank you so much." And he was like, No. God told me to give it to you. So I have this, is this what's happening? But he's like, I was praying and the Lord told me to give this to you. So I'm like, holy cow. So I went to a mentor. I'm like, I'm not sure what to do with this. So what do you think I should do? And he was like, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you put that money in your bank account, set it aside. And why don't you, in 30 days, why don't you pray and ask the Lord, what do you want me to do with this money? Would you reveal what you want to do with this money? Or go back to the guy after 30 days and go, hey, are you sure this is, you were supposed to? So that was his counsel. To the day, almost 30 days, my son was diagnosed with cancer. And that $10,000 helped cover a good portion of that first bit. Wow. So it was God, the goodness of God was you're going to go through something. I think we think about the goodness of God He's eradicating all the bad. Getting rid of all nothing bad's going to happen to you. The goodness of God is I'm preparing you. I'm taking care of you. I've got you. And so I think my wife and I, we were able to in that moment go, okay, he's been preparing us for this. Now it doesn't make the suffering any better. It didn't make cancer easy for 3.5 years. It didn't make, but we knew we have not been abandoned, kind of like Hagar, like El Roy, the God, I see you, and I'm with you. So for us, that has been kind of a reoccurring thing. And the frustrating part is could you just make all the hard go away? But what we're learning, I think the older that we're getting is He's been there all along. And He's actually been preparing us for that. And so that for us, and I know that's not everybody's story, and so I really do I love telling that story, but I also go man, that's not everyone's story, but that was ours. And so I remember for us, we were telling that story on Tuesday, and I thought, wow, not that I had forgotten that story, but how good God was to do that. So we didn't go into this very deep, dark moment just feeling like you've completely, no, I got you, so I just, that one for me, I was just thinking about this week, like, wow, that was so powerful.
I was thinking about it a little bit with my wife and I, and I think what I've experienced too is those moments where, like, the Lord provides maybe before something happens, and then there's that other side to it too, right? Where you step out, and maybe with missions, that's been the most palpable place for us. Like missions, when God says, I want you to step out and to do something, and you just take that step, and it's not fully funded, it's not ready yet. You're like,
you don't
this
have
is
a home.
Foolish, And my wife and I, after we got married, we had bought a house, and we felt like the Lord was calling us into YWAM, and my I won't say who, but some people in my family were not super encouraging when it came to that. I didn't grow up in a Christian household. My wife didn't really either. And so for them, they're like, you're going to just mooch off of people and so it was this whole big thing. So we were already feeling like some familial shame, going into it. And so I was just going, man, Lord, I don't know. And we had just enough basically to like fly out to the school, and but just week after week, the Lord just steadily provided everything that we needed, and I got to travel to India, got to travel to Thailand. We did a missions trip. We spent about 3 months in Cambodia, and we looked back after our year of missions, and I think we had made like $12,000 that year. And it literally didn't make any sense. We were looking at it, I was going, we have to have forgotten something, but the Lord had just provided everything we needed along the way. And it's one of those things, it's just a beautiful, whenever you take that step of faith, whenever the Lord catches you, it's this beautiful story you could look back on. And my wife and I, we took a step of faith moving out here, even when we felt like the Lord was calling us to Phoenix, and all of these steps, we could just look back and go, okay, each time He's caught us. When we step off the cliff, His hand is there to catch our foot, It's just, it's great.
I won't do the story because I feel like your guys' story has already said the same thing, but I had a similar moment of kind of miraculous provision from the Lord when I was 18 and backpacking, and I was in Europe and didn't have a lot of money and stuff, and the Lord provided some money and some medicine and a sleeping bag and a bunch of cool stuff for me. And then the day after that, I was on a train. I had gone from being in this train cart that was like overloaded, like 3 or 4 times as many people as capacity, and I'm smushed in there, and then some guy comes over, train worker, whatever, looks at my URL pass and says, "Oh, what are you doing on this cart? Come follow me over to this one." So he takes me to the first class one where there's just me and like one dude over on the other side of this giant first class bougie train cart, and plops me down there. And in the course of the next few hours of that train ride, I'm talking to the Lord, and I felt like the Lord, He's telling me about the provision of the finances and sleeping bag and stuff that He gave me the day before. And He says, "Alec, it's such a unique moment where it wasn't the audible voice of God, but it was verbatim, where I knew what the Lord was saying directly to me.
Yes.
Might as well have been audible. And I felt like the Lord saying, Alec, I'm always going to take care of you. I'm always going to provide you a house. And if I don't provide you a house, I'm going to provide you a tent. And if I don't provide a tent, I'm going to provide a sleeping bag. And if I don't provide a sleeping bag, I'm going to make sure the weather's nice with you. And if the weather's not nice, I'm going to sit with you in the cold." And I obviously had a sense of the Lord saying also, like, I'll be with you in all those other ones too. But in those scenarios, I just felt, man, you with me in the cold, like, that's the stuff. After having received literal miracle money deposited into my account, and resources coming out of nowhere, it was like, what I really want is you with me. And so it's like, I think that inclination you have, like, that's not everybody's story. That's so true, because this isn't prosperity gospel. This isn't God just gives us money because it's fun and that's what He wants to do. I mean, He does those things, but also not always. And also there's a promise, at least for me, of there may be a day when I'm sitting in the cold, but God's with me, and that's His provision. I was thinking as you were talking, like, I think one of the stories we don't talk about is the road to Emmaus. Like, you got these dudes who, Jesus is crucified and they're heading home. So they were like followers, and they're like, well, I get, and so literally the risen Jesus approaches them. So we're in that week, he appears to them, and they're like, He's like, where you been?
Yeah.
Well, we were hanging out with this guy. We thought he was the Messiah. You know, they use past tense language.
Yes.
We thought he was the Messiah. We thought he was going to rescue Israel, but he died. You know, I can't believe you didn't hear about it. It's kind of big news. Like, he died in like a really bad death, and all along the incarnation is walking alongside of them in their doubt, in their wounding, and it says that he revealed. As they were speaking, so they ended up inviting him into the home, and he starts opening up basically the scriptures, and they see him. They like see him, and they go, "Oh my gosh, he's risen! He's risen! He's risen!" And I think that story is like such an appropriate story for this week, and as we move forward, is like, he didn't go, "Too bad, you doubted me." You know, when it was hard and it didn't work out, good luck. Go back to your hometown. You know, you don't get it. No, he meets them on that road in their doubt, in their discouragement, goes into their home, and then their eyes were awakened. I love that part in the prodigal son where it says, and he came to his senses. Like, and they came to their senses. He's risen, he's risen, he's risen. And that feels to me a little more practical than this kind of theoretical, you know, maybe too high pie in the sky kind of theology, and like, no, he's with us near. So anyway.
Well, I want to close with this one last question for David. So David, as we've gone through this series, and this is kind of the cap on it as we finish it up on Sunday, what are you hoping has happened in the hearts and lives of Living Streams as individuals, Living Streams as a community over the course of the series, Good God?
One of the things that we'd said was we want to train ourselves in the gospel. And that was honestly a big hope. And, you know, I think we definitely plumbed the depths of good news, you know, throughout the whole of Scripture and the revelation of Jesus, and kind of put a different light on it too. I think that it's very different from what our society would say is beautiful or strong, like the gentle, the mercy, the lowly, the willing to engage in the pain, the acknowledgement of the mess, and yet full confidence. I love when Paul says, I am confident of this, that he who began a good work will be faithful to complete it. And then he follows that up with saying, I'm confident that the chains that I'm in right now are going to further the gospel. I'm confident that, you know, all of the things that have happened to me are going to work out for my deliverance. Like so I think that would be like, once you're trained in something, you have a greater confidence in that thing. And so that would be my hope, and that's just my prayer. I mean, it's
what about
for me.
How does that relate to the buoyancy part? Because I think that's important.
Well, the buoyancy is kind of the year-long process, and I mean, really, where we're going next with strengthen yourself in the Lord is you know, confidence. I think is some of that buoyancy, but it's just like, doesn't matter what I face. Doesn't matter if I'm brand new in the prison like Joseph, and I'm the lowest of the prisoners, or if I'm at the top of the prisoners. You know, my confidence is the same, that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And so that's the buoyancy idea, is you know, because life has you. Sometimes you're walking on water. Sometimes you are like down, like under the sand at the bottom of the sea, you know, and there's like fish looking at you like, what's wrong, man? You're gonna die so I can eat you? But so like life just has us in all those things, but the goodness of God, the gospel of God, you know, it does have dividends in every aspect of life. And again, it's, you know, all things work together for good for those who love God and who are called according to purpose. That sounds a lot better when you're walking on water than when you're under the sand. But those things still apply. And I think what you guys were saying with the presence of the Lord, and just to finish, but you guys all mentioned stories of the goodness of God showing up in a provision, a miraculous provision. For a need that you had, and you were a little bit alluding to in your conversations with the Lord on the train was that provision, that sometimes God doesn't provide something miraculous for your situation. He just provides himself. And I think with Paul praying, my grace, you know, 3 times he prayed, Lord, take this thorn from my flesh, and the Lord said, no, I'm not going to give you a miraculous provision of healing. I'm going to give you my grace. And this is the thing that I don't know. And again, this is more of that theodicy type stuff is I think what the Bible says more often is that the miraculous healing you receive is less than the grace that God gives you to endure the pain.
No, I agree with that.
And I'd always rather see the miraculous healing. And it's funny, even when someone comes and they have something they're hurting, it's like I pray for the healing.
100%.
And the Lord knows. But in the scriptures, it does seem a little bit like the better of the two, you know, the having once been broken, better for having once been broken. Like the better of the two is that God would provide his grace, you know, in the sufficient way so that you can endure well, limp well, be broken well, experience his presence in a deeper way well.
That's good.
All that. So
That's beautiful. Well, thank you guys so much just for hanging with us, for talking. I love this. This is
so fun.
I don't know if people watching can tell that this is fun for us because this is what we do, whether or not there's a camera or a microphone. Just a bunch of nerds nerding out. If you are watching online and you missed anything, you didn't see this series, I want to encourage you. You can go check it out at livingstreams.org. You can check it out on our podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can check it out on our app. All these different sermons are in there. And pretty soon, but not quite yet, we'll actually have a resource of some books and some reading on our website. And so it's possible when you're listening to this that might actually be up at livingstreams.org to see some of the things that we recommended, some of the things we read, and then just books that we at Living Streams think you should read these because they're great. So anyway, thanks so much.
Thank you, Dalton.
Yeah,
thanks, Dalton. We appreciate it. All right, well, have a good day.
See you.